One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is a 1975 film that was directed by Milos Forman, and it's based on the 1962 novel that bears the same name by Ken Kesey. The movie stars Jack Nicholson as Randall McMurphy, who is a new patient at a mental institution, and it features a really strong supporting cast, including Louise Fletcher, Will Sampson, Danny DeVito, Sidney Lassick, and Christopher Lloyd. It is on everybody's list of favorite films, and it was the first film since It Happened One Night in 1934 to win all 5 of the top Academy Awards. It won Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Director, and also Best Screenplay. The movie is toned down from the novel into a parable about society's enforcement of conformism. It almost willfully overlooked the realities of mental illness in order to turn the patients into a group of cuddly characters just right for McMurphy's cheerleading. We end up discovering that Chief is not really mute, that Billy didn't need to stutter, and that some of the others need not be paralyzed by shyness and fear. And the biggest fact that it makes is that they're not going to be cured by pills and discussion groups, but by McMurphy liberating them to be guys, to watch the World Series on TV, to go fishing, and to play pickup basketball, and also to get drunk and even get laid. Will Sampson, the actor that played Chief Bromden, was a park ranger in Oregon near where the movie was filmed. He was selected for the part because he was the only Native American the casting department could find who matched the character's incredible size. During the filming, which was done on location at Oregon State Mental Hospital, a crew member that was running cables left a second-story window open, and an actual patient climbed through the bars and fell to the ground, injuring himself. The papers in that area the next day had on the front page the headline, "One Flew Out of the Cuckoo's Nest." The author of the book, Ken Kesey, was so bitter about the way the filmmakers were butchering his story that he vowed to never watch the completed film. And he even sued the movie's producers because the movie wasn't shown from Chief Bromden's perspective as it is in the novel. Quite a few years later, he claimed that he was lying in bed one night, flipping through the television channels, when he settled into a late-night movie that looked sort of interesting, only then to realize, after a few minutes, that it was his film, and then he promptly changed the channel. The director relied heavily on reaction shots to pull more characters into the scenes. In some group therapy scenes, there were 10 minutes of Jack Nicholson's reactions that were filmed, even if he had very little dialogue. The shot of Louise Fletcher looking at Nicholson after he returns from shock therapy was actually her being irritated by a piece of direction from the director. The cast and crew had become really accustomed to working with extras and supporting crew members who were real patients at the Oregon State Mental Hospital. Each member of the professional cast worked closely with at least 2 or 3 mental patients during the filming. Now, there were rumors that the production was shut down because Jack Nicholson had hair plugs implanted while he was shooting the film. These are all false. But the truth of the story is that Nicholson and the director had very different ideas about how the narrative should play out. For example, Foreman thought that the ward should be in chaos when McMurphy showed up, and Nicholson thought that his character would have absolutely no effect on the mental patients if they were already riled up, which would in truth negate the purpose of his character and the plot of the film. Nicholson and Foreman refused to give an inch, each believing that he was right and that the other was wrong. The 2 months that Nicholson supposedly disappeared was actually closer to 2 weeks, and he really didn't disappear. In actuality, he spearheaded a coup among the other cast members, and he refused to let Foreman run rehearsals. He ran them himself instead. He and the director didn't get along at all. They spoke to each other through the cinematographer, but they faked a friendly relationship when the media and studio personnel would show up to the set. During the electroconvulsive therapy session, also called ECT, McMurphy says, "A little dab will do ya," as the nurse is putting conductor gel on the side of his head. This phrase was not in the original script, and it's a reference to the advertising jingle of Brill Cream hair cream, which was a really popular hair care product for men in the 1960s and early 70s. In the novel, Nurse Ratched is described by Chief Bromden as having a face that is smooth, calculated, and precision-made, like an expensive baby doll. Skin like flesh-colored enamel that is a blend of white and cream with baby blue eyes. She also has a small nose with pink little nostrils. But the only things on the nurse that doesn't match her perfect appearance is having lips and fingernails that are both the color of orange, as well as her carrying oversized breasts, completed with a heavy starched white nurse uniform that tightly conceals her top heaviness to hide her femininity. Kirk Douglas had optioned the 1962 book, and he planned to make it into a movie, but he couldn't find any studios that wanted to make the film. He then adapted it into a Broadway play in 1963, but it wasn't successful at all. So he went out and tried to sell Cuckoo's Nest. His son Michael told his dad that he wanted to produce the film and that he needed to get some backing for it. And the plan was to have his father star in the movie. By the time the film was produced, it was thought that Kirk Douglas was too old to play the part, so Jack Nicholson got the role instead. But that movie made so much money that it was the most lucrative project of Kirk Douglas's entire life. And there were quite a few actresses that were considered for the part, and some of them actually were offered the part of Nurse Ratched. Anne Bancroft, Ellen Burstyn, Faye Dunaway, Jane Fonda, Angela Lansbury, and Shirley MacLaine were all considered for the part. Louise Fletcher had no idea that this part was so hotly contested for among many actresses in Hollywood, but she found this out when a reporter mentioned it to her after she was cast for the film. In the novel, she never really has a first name. It's never mentioned. In the film, though, when the hospital committee meets to discuss McMurphy's behavior, Dr. Spivey calls her Mildred. Now, the nurse's old-fashioned hairstyle shows how uptight she really is. It also is no coincidence that it resembles the horns of the devil. In later interviews, Louise Fletcher said that she found ways to make her character seem human, yet remain unsympathetic, ultimately deciding that Nurse Ratched actually did care about the patients and felt she was doing what she thought was best for them. But in reality, she was ultimately misguided and drunk on her own power. Fletcher said that she was so disturbed by this role that she played, and her performance was so on cue that she couldn't watch the film for many years after its release. And it's also said that she was pretty upset about the fact that the other cast members could laugh and be happy on set, while she had to be cold and heartless. And finally, near the end of the production, she ended up taking off her dress and stood there in her underclothes to prove to cast members that she was not a cold-hearted monster and that she was up for a good time too. Now, not only was Louise Fletcher affected by her portrayal in this movie, so was Sidney Lassick. Some of the cast and crew really became concerned about his behavior. He exhibited increasingly unpredictable and emotionally erratic behavior during his time when he was in character. And this pattern kind of ended up in a tearful outburst during his observation of the final scene between McMurphy and Chief. He became so overwhelmed during the shooting of that scene that he had to be physically removed from the set. This film is remembered as a comedy about the inmate revolt led by McMurphy and the fishing trip, the all-night orgy, and the defiance of Nurse Ratched. But in fact, it is about Murphy's defeat. We can call it a moral victory and rejoice in Chief's escape, but that is very small consolation for McMurphy. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll continue to chase the classics.